Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off, because today I am going to be reviewing and paging through the Old School Essentials Advanced Fantasy Player's Tome from Necrotic Gnome. Is this an excellent mashup of BX Dungeons and Dragons and First Edition Advanced D&D? Or is this simply yet another redundant retro clone that you can easily take a pass on? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, today I'll be reviewing the Old School Essentials Advanced Fantasy Player's Tome from Necrotic Gnome and Exalted Funeral. It is written by Gavin Norman, and this 248-page A5-sized hardcover is available here in the U.S. through Exalted Funeral. Carries an MSRP of $40. Or you can grab the PDF over at DriveThruRPG for $15. And of course, do want to mention the Gaming Gang is affiliated with the One Bookshelf sites. So if you are going to visit DriveThruRPG, please stop by thegaminggang.com first. Click on one of our banner ads. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a little portion of that sale. And all those nickels, dimes, and quarters really do help keep the Gaming Gang around. So let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got the Old School Essentials Advanced Fantasy Player's Tome. So not too long ago, I featured a review of the Old School Essentials Classic Fantasy Rules Tome. Loved it. I have already done a first look and page through for both the Player's Tome and the Referee's Tome for Advanced Fantasy as well. Those took place on my live show, the Gaming Gang Dispatch. So if you want to get a bit more of a deeper dive, seeing more of the book, I would probably recommend checking out that first look video that I did. But before we dive in, do want to mention a few things. First off, the fine folks over at Necrotic Gnome were kind enough to provide me with this review copy of the Advanced Fantasy Player's Tome. But neither I nor anyone else affiliated with Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share my thoughts about this book with you. These days, it's important that you know that. Also, I'm going to say picture-in-picture up here. So that means as we take a peek through, I'm going to be cutting off a bit of the upper left portion of the book. But of course, we're not going to look at each and every page as well. I just want to give you a good feel for what's in the book and share my thoughts about it also. Keep in mind, this is not scripted. This is completely stream of consciousness as I talk about what I like about the Player's Tome and what I think really stands out as well. So let's jump on in. One thing you're going to notice, and we've seen this with both the classic rules as well as the advanced fantasy, is the inner cover and outer cover are pretty much what you would expect to find with a referee's screen, a GM screen. So pretty cool. I like that fact. Should also mention, if you happen to purchase the physical book, at least from Exalted Funeral, you will also receive the PDF absolutely free. So you get the PDF with the physical book. Love that as well. So we're going to just kind of jump in here, kind of give you a feel for Old School Essentials, at least with the Advanced Fantasy. With Classic Fantasy, it is a cleaning up, a modernization of basic and expert Dungeons and Dragons. What Advanced Fantasy does is it still works on the BX model. It is still built on that skeleton, but it ports over a lot of the cool stuff from first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, keeping in mind the core mechanics remain BX. So I know a lot of people out there have been kind of curious if this is kind of the classic rules sort of treatment for AD&D. It is not. So this is the cool stuff from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons built on a BX skeleton. It's important that you know that. Personally, I think that's great. I think it's awesome because BX really is very easy to grasp. It's super easy to wrap your head around as far as old school rules, especially the way that they're presented by Necrotic Gnome. And with Advanced D&D, you get so many more options that become available. You get way more monsters, way more spells, way more treasure, way more player character options as well. So we get into creating your character, the basic method. We also have an advanced method. Also, we've got some optional rules that you can utilize. One that I would certainly use is the optional ascending armor class. I think a lot of people out there who play role-playing games are so used to their D20 and rolling high. I would stick to that with the optional ascending armor class rules in here. One of the aspects that I think is really nicely done is the presentation of race as class, or using the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons model where the race and class are separate. So you have both options here. You can play an elf as that's the class. You can play the drow as if that's the class, or you can also play where you've got your class and your race. So you'll have special racial attributes as well as bonuses. Now, there are some rules involved where if you're going to use the separation of class and race, some little modifiers to utilize for humans, because the big deal with humans was always, as far as BX went, was they had kind of the ability to adapt. So that's why they have an unlimited level range for every class, whereas some of the races you're looking at, they're only able to get to a certain level. So that was one of the big bonuses of playing a human and missing out on things like, dark vision and being able to hear at doors so much better and spot hidden doors as well, much easier than other races could. So you have some relatively minor modifications that are recommended. It is an optional rule, of course. One aspect I thought was pretty wild, too, is that as far as your choices of races, we do have some races that were not present in the player's handbook for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So we actually have the drow. We have the Duergar. I think that's how those dwarves are pronounced. We've got the Zentite. So I thought that was kind of cool that we do have some races that were not necessarily in first edition AD&D's player handbook. So we've got a lot of page space devoted to the various different classes and races. We've got equipment. We've got a very small bestiary as far as beasts of burden. We have different rules for various different vessels, as well as vehicles and their costs and points as well. We get some information about hirelings, mercenaries, followers as well. So everything that you would expect to see in BX is still here as well. Now, a lot of it is absolutely 100% compatible to classic fantasy. Something I should also point out, if you're interested in advanced fantasy, you don't have to purchase the classic rules tome. Everything you need to play is going to be in the player's tome, the referee's tome, for Old School Essentials Advanced Fantasy. Something else to keep in mind, all this information is in kind of bite-sized chunks. We don't have 30 pages devoted to a single topic. Most of the time, we're going to see a couple of pages, maybe 4, for different aspects of gameplay. Of course, we do have categories like different spells that are going to take up far more than just a couple of pages. But as you can see, just taking a peek at these spell descriptions, very short, very concise, not having to read an entire page to get the stat blocks for any of the spells. That is one of the aspects that I love about not just Old School Essentials, but OSR in general, is that players and game masters don't have to sit there and memorize huge chunks of information as far as monsters and magic and treasure. So we've got the different magic user spells, we've got druid spells, we've got illusionist spells, and of course, we also would have cleric spells. A lot of page space is devoted to the spells. This is a player-facing book. That's why it is the player's tome. But the referee needs to have this book as well. So continuing on, as I mentioned, a lot of spells in here also. Then we get into kind of rules for the game, which are pretty easy to wrap your head around. As far as adventuring, we get a little information about combat. One thing that I dig about Basic and Expert, and I'm sure people who watch the channel all the time are probably going to be tired of me talking about this, but when I was introduced to D&D, I didn't play Basic or Expert. We played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and I started playing. I wasn't even in high school yet when I was first introduced to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't have the basic set. I didn't have the expert set. I didn't see all those adventures. I had the AD&D adventures. But one aspect of BX that I really, really dig is how modular it is. How you can take rules that you enjoy, house ruling around your own table, and plugging them into a BX skeleton. I love that. And of course, all throughout the Advanced Fantasy books, we have some different little optional rules that you can include in your games as well. Yes, the classic statue from the Player's Handbook of first edition AD&D. The artwork throughout is pretty cool as well. And we get into combat. And look at that, 4 pages of rules for combat is pretty much your breakdown for that. Like I said, it is so much easier for new players to role-playing games wrap their heads around this kind of rule system than even 5e. 5e is far crunchier than BX or Old School Essentials or many of the retro clones that are based on a BX skeleton. All right. Get some combat tables, indexes, our open game license, and once again, we get this back cover that is another section that you would find on a referee's screen. That is what you find inside Old School Essentials Advanced Fantasy from Necrotic Gnome. Let me swing on over to the other camera so I can provide my final thoughts as well as a review score. So I gave Old School Essentials Classic Fantasy a 10 out of 10. I thought it was that good. Really, really dig it. If anybody has any sort of desire to run BX D&D and have those rules easily understood, can't go wrong picking up the classic fantasy rules. Same applies here for AD&D. If you want to enjoy all the cool stuff from AD&D, and we'll get into a lot more of it when I do my review of the Referee's Tome. But if you want to enjoy the character classes, the character races, all those kind of different options, all the different spells, there were far more spells in Advanced D&D compared to, say, Basic or Expert, although there were a good number of spells. This has far more spells. But if you want to enjoy Advanced Dungeons and Dragons without having to delve into that high Gygaxian language, as we like to call it from time to time, then you definitely want to pick up the Advanced Fantasy Player's Tome as well as the Referee's Tome. You have decades of adventures in front of you that you can go back through the history of fantasy role-playing games and play around your table with just 2 books, this and the Referee's Tome. I'm knocked out by this as well as I was the Classic Rules Tome. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the Old School Essentials Advanced Fantasy Player's Tome a 10 out of 10. I dig this big time. I am going to be running some OSR-fueled fantasy role-playing with my nephew and my niece, possibly my brother and my best friend, some of my nephew's friends as well. And it is going to be powered by OSE Advanced Fantasy. It's that good. Really, really dig it. Once again, you can pick up the hardcover through, at least here in the U.S., through Exalted Funeral. It carries an MSRP of $40. You can grab the PDF over at DriveThruRPG for $15. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, ding that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also tell you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news, as well as first looks at tabletop gaming releases. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you so much for taking time out to watch the video. And until I see you next time, here's hoping each and every one of you gets to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang. Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel by clicking right here. Check out the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch, or find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks for watching.